Welcome back now for the news in detail. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi says India's illegal move to revoke occupied Kashmir special status has put regional peace at stake. Briefing the diplomats about the situation in occupied valley, Qureshi said Kashmiris have been locked up in their houses since August 5th. He said there is a complete communication blackout in the occupied region. Qureshi said the international community must take notice of the situation and intervene to protect the rights of Kashmiris. The foreign minister also said Pakistan is facing floods because India is not respecting the Indus Waters Treaty and has released water without prior warning. Meanwhile, Qureshi told his Japanese and Maldivian counterparts about human rights violations in occupied Kashmir. Japan's foreign minister said his country believes in upholding human rights and the rule of law. In occupied Kashmir, Indian security forces have fired tear gas shells and used pellet guns to disperse the protesters. Thousands of demonstrators have taken to the streets of Srinagar against withdrawal of the region's special status by India. More in this report.
The situation has worsened in occupied Kashmir since India stripped it of its special status on August the 5th and put the valley under severe lockdown. Responding to an overnight call via posters, the protesters came out after Friday prayers despite a heavy paramilitary presence.
We want to solve this problem in a peaceful manner, but the Indian government has militarized this area. They are suppressing us, they are pressurizing us. But we want to say that Kashmiris have never bowed down in front of military forces and will never do.
The demonstrators chanted slogans against the Indian government atrocities and vowed to continue fighting for independence until their last breath.
We are here for our independence. We will, inshallah, by the grace of Almighty Allah, we will fight until our last breath for our independence.
Protests have broken out in parts of Srinagar over the last 2 weeks, which have left 152 people injured by tear gas and pellets.
Also in Paris, Kashmir Council, Europe, Sikh community and other organizations have protested against illegal move of India to revoke occupied Kashmir special status. The demonstration was staged on Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's arrival in France. The protesters said New Delhi's move is unconstitutional and against international laws. They said India is committing gross human rights violations in the occupied valley. The protesters also expressed fear about a genocide in occupied Kashmir under the pretext of security operations. They urged the world powers to intervene and stop Modi's oppressive measures. The 45th annual G7 summit will start today in France. Leaders of the world's leading developed economies are meeting to shape a response to global challenges. The host, President Emmanuel Macron, says he wants member states to focus on the issues of gender inequality, education and climate change. Macron has called for the fires in the Amazon rainforest to lead the summit agenda, calling them an international crisis. He has invited EU officials and leaders from Asia, Africa and Latin America to join the G7 for a global push on these issues. The leaders will also address the escalating trade war between the US and China, the Iran nuclear deal and unrest in Hong Kong. The United States says it will raise tariffs on Chinese exports worth $250 billion by 5% from October 1st. In a tweet, President Donald Trump asked U.S. companies to leave China and find alternatives to doing business with Beijing. Trump said the U.S. does not need China because it has lost trillions of dollars in dealings with the country over many years. Reacting to the new tariffs, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce said it does not want to see further deterioration of trade relations with China. This comes after Beijing unveiled retaliatory tariffs on $75 billion worth of imports from the U.S. China's Commerce Ministry said punitive tariffs of 5 to 10% will be imposed on 5,000 U.S. goods. Some Chinese tariff hikes will take effect on September 1st and others on December 15th. Meanwhile, South Korea's military says North Korea has test-fired 2 more short-range ballistic missiles off its east coast. This is the 7th missile test conducted by North Korea in a month. Expressing strong concern, Seoul's National Security Council urged Pyongyang to refrain from acts that raise military tensions. South Korea's military said it is tracking movements in the north to watch for more launches. Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump has said he has a good relationship with North Korea's leader.
Kim Jong-un has been, pretty straight with me, I think. And we're going to see what's going on. We're going to see what's happening. He likes testing missiles, but we never restricted short-range missiles. We'll see what happens.
Well, nuclear talks between the United States and North Korea have been stalled since June. Now moving on, Israeli forces have wounded at least 127 Palestinians during weekly protests along the Gaza border. Palestine's health ministry says Israeli troops fired live ammunition and rubber bullets at the protesters. The ministry says the wounded include 3 medics and a child. The demonstrations call for the lifting of Israel's blockade of the Gaza Strip imposed in 2007. Officials say over 300 Palestinians have been killed since the start of the weekly protest in March last year. Yemen southern separatists have declared a ceasefire after 2 days of fighting with government forces in Shabwa province. In a statement, the Southern Transition Council says all parties should exercise restraint and abide by the ceasefire. The council called on its forces to retain control of the institutions and territory they have seized. The separatist leadership warned against any attacks on Saudi-led coalition forces. The separatists seized the southern port city of Aden earlier this month and last week extended their control to neighboring Abyan. Moving on, Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif has ruled out the possibility of renegotiating the 2015 nuclear deal. The minister says he has held productive talks with French President Emmanuel Macron in Paris about the landmark agreement. Zarif says both sides have presented suggestions about how to make the nuclear accord work. He says future developments depend on how European countries fulfill their commitments to the agreement. US President Donald Trump pulled out accord in May last year and reimposed sanctions on Iran. Russian President Vladimir Putin has ordered his military to prepare a reciprocal response to a recent US cruise missile test. The test is the US first since withdrawing from the Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty earlier this month. In a statement, the Kremlin said Putin has ordered an analysis of the threat posed by the US test. The Kremlin says US talk of deploying new missiles in Asia-Pacific region affects Russia's core interests. It cited President Putin as saying the US missile test shows Washington aims to deploy previously banned missiles around the world. He said Russia does not want to be drawn into an arms race, but deployment is close to its eastern border. The Russian president expressed a willingness to hold negotiations with the US to restore trust and strengthen international security. Russia has launched the world's first floating nuclear reactor in the Arctic. The reactor has set off on a 5,000-kilometer journey through Arctic waters to the Chukotka region. The plant, called the Academic Lomonosov, is loaded with nuclear fuel. It will replace a coal-fired power station and an aging nuclear plant supplying electricity to 50,000 people in the town of Pevek. Experts have expressed concerns about the environmental impact. Now, Sri Lanka has ended the state of emergency imposed after the Easter Sunday terrorist attacks in April. Sri Lanka's military says the withdrawal of the emergency signifies the return of calm harm to the country. The emergency law gave security forces extensive powers to detain and interrogate suspects without court orders. Over 250 people were killed and more than 500 wounded in the attacks on churches and hotels in Colombo. The state of emergency has lasted for 4 months since a series of suicide bombings at churches and tourist hotels killed scores of people. Now, in Indonesia, 4 people have been killed and another 33 went missing after a passenger ferry caught fire off the coast of Java. Rescue officials say 245 people have been rescued. The ferry was traveling from the city of Surabaya to Balikpapan on the island of Borneo with 280 people on board. The cause of the fire is yet to be determined. Welcome back. Now, moving on with the news stories. Brazil has ordered its armed forces to help fight a record number of forest fires in the Amazon. The orders came after growing international anger over the country's environmental crisis. President Jair Bolsonaro authorized the deployment of soldiers in nature reserves, indigenous lands and border areas in the region. Earlier, French President Emmanuel Macron threatened to block a European Union trade deal with South American states, including Brazil. But German Chancellor Angela Merkel opposed scrapping the agreement, saying it is not an appropriate response. The EU is Mercosur's second largest trading partner. A record number of wildfires are decimating the Brazilian Amazon. The world's largest tropical rainforest in the heart of the Amazon, the Mura indigenous people have vowed to protect their land amid threats from farmers, logging and raging fires. More in this report.
Brazil's Amazon rainforest has been on fire for weeks. The wildfires came against the backdrop of right-wing President Jair Bolsonaro's government. He has rallied against environmental fines for farmers and called for indigenous land to be opened up for development. But in the face of this environmental disaster, there are the local tribes who get the short end of the straw.
It's a blight on life. You are seeing the lives wasted over there. People look here and you can see the damage. It's the goal of the man to finish it off. Our objectives are to protect our area, nature, trees and animals.
The Mura tribe has long had a history of resistance in the Amazon. They have promised no let-up against the Bolsonaro government.
Over the years, we have resisted here. When there was no access by road, when electricity arrived, when the invasion happened, and with each passing day, we see the destruction at once. Deforestation, invasion, logging. We are sad because the forest is dying at every moment.
It is not only Brazil suffering from the raging wildfires. Blazes in eastern Bolivia have burned more than 450,000 hectares, according to officials. Sucre has called for tri-national cooperation with Brasilia and Asunción to control wildfires near the border of the 3 countries.
This concentration of fire affects Paraguay, Bolivia and Brazil. It would be insufficient to respond only on Bolivian territory because it would force us to respond in parts of Paraguayan territory and another part in Brazilian territory.
The blazes have nearly doubled this year compared to the same period in 2018, according to Brazilian officials. This has prompted global outrage.
Moving on, the World Health Organization says the year-long Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo has killed nearly 2,000 people. It says 80 new cases were confirmed last week. WHO Executive Director Michael Ryan says the situation remains serious, but he hopes the high number of cases will begin to drop. Ryan says the WHO now has vaccines and effective therapeutics that really change the direction of the Ebola epidemic. This comes after a breakthrough trial for 2 drugs showed a survival rate of 90%.
The outbreak has continued at substantial but stable transmission intensity for the past 10 weeks. Since mid-June, we've observed approximately 80 new confirmed cases per week. Cases over the last 2 to 3 weeks have started to reduce, and we hope this trend will continue.
Congo is taking steps to counter Ebola with the help of the African Union and the United Nations. Now moving on, tracing their lineage, Jamestown Rediscovery Foundation aims to find the first American slaves who came to North America. This region was the first permanent English settlement and later became a part of United States. More in this report.
The organization digs through what traces remain of the first slaves to land in North America 400 years ago. Originally from the Kingdom of Ndongo in what is now Angola, a woman named Angela was loaded onto a Portuguese ship in Luanda. After a terrifying Atlantic crossing, Angela was one of the first African slaves known to reach what is now the United States. The rolling green landscape, which gently slopes towards the James River, is likely to be the one the African slaves first saw when they arrived in August 1619.
The site behind me here is the site where Angela lived, and we're digging square after square on a grid system that was established by the Park Service in the 1930s, and every time we dig, we just take layer after layer down and hopefully get to that 1619 period. And if we find something, then we just open up the squares next to it.
At the time, Portuguese and Spanish slave traders had already been selling Africans as laborers in the Americas for nearly a century. Almost a third of the slaves died on the voyage from Africa because conditions on board ship were so bad. The enslaved Africans arrived shortly after settlers founded the first local legislature on July 30th, 1619, which marks the beginning of a dark period of US history. 250 years of slavery, followed by a long period of racial segregation. The struggle for equal rights continues to this day.
Inequality is so striking even today that has its roots in what began here hundreds of years ago. That's something we need to be aware of to tackle it.
They believe the more data they gather and discourses they arrange, the easier it would be to break with the insidious legacy of the past.
Beijing blooms with floral works created by contestants at the 2019 World Flower Art Contest. This is the first international flower competition held at the Beijing Horticultural Expo.
Aesthetically themed floral decorations are displayed at the ongoing Beijing Horticulture Expo. A total of 33 florists from 31 countries and regions brought their artistic concepts to the exhibition. Over 100 floral artworks from the preliminary and final rounds are on show to the public. The beauty on display is not simply meant to be seen. The fragrance gives another layer to the spectacle.
They are top florists hailing from across the world. They express the hope for a better future by infusing ethnic customs and the beauty of nature into their works.
Through their work, florists from all around the world are able to collaborate on ideas of beauty. Each piece is produced according to the traditions of the contestant's country and executed with precision.
It looks like a special shaped chime featuring traditional Chinese culture, but I used Western arranging style to create it, showing a blender of different cultures.
The final stage of competition wrapped up on Tuesday with Australia's Mark Pampling winning the crown.
Now some business stories. International financial markets have taken a big hit following the latest escalation of the trade war between the United States and China. Wall Street indices led by the tech-heavy Nasdaq sunk by up to 3% after Beijing and Washington exchanged tariff hikes. Stock markets in France and Germany also lost more than 1%. Oil prices plunged 2.5% on fears the trade war escalation could push the global economy into recession. Investors looking for a safe haven have piled their money into precious metals, boosting the prices of gold and silver by 2%. Meanwhile, Chinese technology giant Huawei says the impact of years' trade restrictions on its business will be less than initially feared. However, the restrictions could lower revenue from the company's smartphone unit by $10 billion this year. Huawei's $100 billion business has been hit hard since mid-May after Washington put it on a blacklist. The restrictions have barred Huawei from using essential U.S. components and technology. At a news conference in Shenzhen, Huawei's deputy chairman Eric Zhu said the sales crisis has improved. Previously, company sales had fallen by 40%. Now, in Gulf America's Brooks Koepka has taken a one-shot lead after the second round of the Tour Championship in Atlanta. North Ireland's Rory McIlroy and Justin Thomas of the US are tied in second place. Koepka birdied the 18th hole while capping a 3-under par 67. The American leads McIlroy by one shot, leaving him at 12 under par. Thomas lost the opening round lead and settled for second spot. Thomas's fellow American Xander Schauffele ended the day in third. Now, Australia lead by 283 runs at the end of day 2 of the third Ashes Test, with 4 wickets remaining in their second innings. The visitors will begin day 3 at 171 for 6. Australia had a shaky start in their second innings before Marnus Labuschagne came to the rescue. Labuschagne is still on the crease at 53 runs. Stuart Broad and Ben Stokes took 2 wickets each for the hosts. Earlier, England were bowled out for 67 in their first innings. Only one English batsman was able to reach double figures. England are 1-0 down in the Ashes after losing the first test by 251 runs. The recent power-sharing council in Sudan has raised people's optimism in embattled country. Rising to the occasion, a group of young women are stepping up to make their presence felt in society. On the heels of chaos and amid looming insecurity and uncertainty, Sudanese women are defying fear and breaking stereotypes. Using sport as their weapon of choice, a group of young women are reclaiming a normal life from the disorder. The recent respite brought the civil-military deal has enabled the authorities to organize a sporting event for women. Women footballers say they had never expected to play on the field.
A year ago, before the revolution, I could not have imagined myself being a player in a women's football team, or even expected myself to be able to play the sport I have loved. There were many restrictions on Sudanese women, and it was not possible to play football.
Organizers say Sudanese women have passed the complicated phase and are now moving towards a bright future.
In the past, it was difficult for women to play football. There were many complications that prevented them from participating in this activity. But now, everyone is looking forward to a new reality and has new ambitions. Now, society has become more receptive to this idea and more accepting of the participation of women in all the areas of life.
The football championship, involving 18 clubs separated into 3 regions, is scheduled to start next month. Now let's have a look at the weather updates across the world. With the weather update, we come to the end of this bulletin. For more news and update, keep watching Indus News.